Welcome to QuizBase channel. This challenge is about 65 quizzes about human body. If you score above 40, you are a genius. Which organ is responsible for pumping blood throughout the body? Heart. Which organ is responsible for filtering waste and excess fluids from the blood? Kidney. Which organ is involved in producing urine and regulating fluid balance? Bladder. Which organ stores bile produced by the liver? Gallbladder. Which organ is responsible for producing red blood cells? Bone marrow. Which organ is involved in detoxifying chemicals and metabolizing drugs? Liver. Which organ is the body's largest internal organ and performs over 500 functions? Liver. Which organ is responsible for storing glycogen and detoxifying harmful substances? Liver. Which bone protects the brain? Skull. Which organ is responsible for converting food into energy? Pancreas. Which organ is responsible for producing antibodies to fight infections? Spleen. Which organ is responsible for producing sperm cells? Fascius. Which part of the body is responsible for balance and coordination? Brain. Which organ is responsible for converting light into signals that go to the brain? Eye. Which organ is responsible for controlling body temperature? Skin. Which organ is involved in producing hormones that regulate metabolism? Thyroid. Which organ is responsible for filtering air and producing sound? Larynx. Which organ is responsible for producing and circulating lymphocytes? Lymph nodes. Which part of the body is responsible for storing memories? Brain. Which organ is responsible for producing the hormone melatonin? Pineal gland. Which organ is responsible for breaking down food into smaller particles? Stomach. Which organ is responsible for filtering toxins from the blood and producing bile? Liver. Which organ is responsible for converting food into a form of energy the body can use? Pancreas. Which organ is responsible for filtering blood and removing old or damaged blood cells? Spleen. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood pressure? Heart. Which organ is responsible for producing the hormone adrenaline? Adrenal glands. Which organ is responsible for storing excess glucose in the form of glycogen? Liver. Which organ is responsible for producing and releasing bile into the small intestine? Liver. Which part of the body is responsible for regulating blood pH levels? Lungs. Which organ is responsible for filtering toxins and waste from the blood? Kidney. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood sugar levels? Pancreas. Which organ is involved in producing antibodies and fighting infections? Thymus. Which organ is responsible for filtering lymph and aiding an immune response? Lymph nodes. Which organ is responsible for producing and storing blood cells? Bone marrow. Which organ is responsible for regulating calcium levels in the body? Parathyroid glands. Which part of the body is responsible for producing the hormone insulin? Pancreas. Which part of the body is responsible for producing the hormone estrogen? Ovaries. Which organ is involved in the production of red blood cells? Bone marrow? Which organ is responsible for filtering out toxins and waste from the blood? Liver. Which part of the body is responsible for storing fat and regulating body temperature? Adipose tissue. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood oxygen levels? Lungs. Which organ is responsible for converting light into images that we see? Retina. Which part of the body is responsible for controlling voluntary movements? Brain. Which organ is responsible for regulating hunger and satiety? Brain. Which part of the body is responsible for producing the hormone cortisol? Adrenal glands. Which organ is responsible for storing and releasing urine? Bladder. Which part of the body is responsible for producing and releasing the hormone serotonin? Brain. Which organ is responsible for regulating heart rate and blood pressure? Brain. Which part of the body is responsible for producing and storing the hormone adrenaline? Adrenal glands. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood clotting? Platelets. Which organ is responsible for producing and storing bile? Liver. Which part of the body is responsible for producing the hormone oxytocin? Pituitary gland. Which organ is responsible for producing and releasing the hormone growth hormone? Pituitary gland. Which part of the body is responsible for filtering toxins and producing bile? Liver. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood pressure and fluid balance? Kidney. Which part of the body is responsible for producing the hormone thyroxine? Thyroid. Which organ is responsible for filtering blood and removing toxins from the body? Kidney. Which part of the body is responsible for producing and releasing the hormone insulin? Pancreas. Which organ is responsible for filtering blood and removing old or damaged blood cells? Spleen. Which part of the body is responsible for producing and releasing the hormone adrenaline? Adrenal glands. Which organ is responsible for storing and releasing the hormone insulin? Pancreas. Which part of the body is responsible for producing and storing the hormone estrogen? Ovaries. Which organ is responsible for filtering blood and removing toxins from the body? Kidney. Please subscribe and like to support our channel.